yours.
Good morning and afternoon. Thank everyone for taking time out of their day to join us here at IMAGINiT. Today I'm going to walk you through migration to the Autodesk platform and some of the pitfalls that are encountered as you move along through this. A little bit about myself. I am the manager of the infrastructure services group, and I've been in the industry since 1977. Been in the reseller world since 2008. I'm proud to say I started AutoCAD when it was still single digits, and I am a professional surveyor in the state of Ohio. A little bit about IMAGINiT. IMAGINiT is a firm where we offer consultative services and as well as training aspects from custom. And then you're also probably familiar with our sister company, Ascent. And Ascent is the one that creates the majority of the certified training manuals for Autodesk. We are the largest reseller in North America, and because of that, you get great technical expertise. We have over 126 technical experts, 35 plus years of experience in every discipline, and 45,000 satisfied customers. You can see from this slide our organization. We have 34 training centers. We work on a ReadyTech virtual learning platform to give consistency in software loads for our training sessions. We also have dedicated virtual labs. And then we have all the specialties within the Autodesk world. This is a look at the infrastructure solutions and reality capture solutions group that we work closely from the civil engineering perspective and the typical projects that happen. We use a methodology that we call TAKEAIM in everything that we do, and it really is a defined process. And this allows us to provide a complete implementation and service no matter what the discipline is. And it starts out with the definition of that particular service. Today we're going to talk about migration to the Autodesk platform. But that definition means that you have to assess what's happening now, assess the past environment, and then document and establish the parameters to move forward. Then we come up with a development plan, and that development plan always includes the best practices that we've learned through the years of our service. And it may include product training, it may include process mapping, and then the integration and migration of the services. From there, we typically will do a pilot project or a test project to make sure that everything works. And from that, advanced product training may come into play from there. And then we move into the production mode so that we make sure that our client is comfortable with the new platform and understands everything. So let's really focus now on the migration to Autodesk. So what is migration to Autodesk? It's a comprehensive services framework for the migration from a Bentley to Autodesk platform. And so there are procedures and workflows that we need to develop to get from Bentley to Autodesk. So it really is more than an implementation. It really includes a number of other items. Includes the migration of legacy standards. And so we have to look at not only what the current active CAD standards are, we have to look at decades, in some cases, of legacy standards. And so what was being done 10 years ago could be different from what's 20 years ago. And then as we move everything forward into current CAD standards. Workflows are important in how those workflows are actually being done. So we really take a deep dive into exactly what so that we can move forward with that workflow once we go into the new environment, whether it's Autodesk, Civil 3D, or any other software within the Autodesk platform. We also have to look at automation. We all through the years have automated our work environment and our workspace. And so were there routines created on the Bentley platform? Were there wizards created in that work environment to help them with their production? And if so, then now we need to look at the reprogramming of those particular wizards or routines into routines that will function within the Autodesk world. What we found is in a lot of cases, because a lot of those routines were legacy routines, they tend to be taken care of natively within the new Autodesk environment. But things specialized as such as wizards and things of that nature that do a multiple of things in creating details and blocks and things of that nature need to be reprogrammed and created in the Autodesk world. Data management. How was that data managed in the Bentley platform? Was it a project-wise solution? Was it a SharePoint solution? Was there no solution? And then look at moving forward, what are we going to do? Is it going to still be managed in a project-wise environment? We have to take that into consideration. Are we going to move it over to Autodesk Vault and that data management system? Again, we need to make sure that we have a complete plan for that. And then, finally, once all the plans are put together, it's the migration and the conversion of the legacy data, cells to blocks, DGNs to DWGs, as far back as the client may need. So what is migration to Autodesk? Well, we have over 100 plus years of experience assisting customers with migration process, but each engagement is uniquely based upon the client. So a migration from MicroStation to AutoCAD from a plant perspective is far different than a migration from the Bentley products such as Power Civil or Open Roads over to Civil 3D. So we have to look at each client. We have to look at their CAD standards currently and historically. And then we have to come up with those migration plans for that. So every customer is unique. It's not a blueprint plan. We've made this service reproducible. So we've learned from our best practices, and we have been able to pass those on in the migration of our clients and making that as smooth a transition as possible. In the recent years, we've seen an increase in requests for migration services, and part of that is due to the Bentley going public, and now they're looking to consolidate their platforms rather than being dual platform houses. We've created a formal structure service so that the process is simple to understand and that it's easily explained and delineated for our clientele. So the migration process is really a multi-phase process. And through these steps, you accomplish the end result and set your goals. The first step is the discovery. And this discovery allows us to really drill down in those CAD standards. The CAD standards are critical for a successful migration. And so the first issue is to document those. What levels are being used, what cells are being used, and how we're going to migrate those. Then we have to look at things such as how far back are we going? Are we on version 8? Are we on version 7? Do we go back as far as numeric levels? So the 1 to 63 days when we were doing that. Are they used consistently? And that's the CAD standard review. We found out in our clients that have multiple divisions that they may use a level for different things. So the symbology and everything is different from that. You have to really look at how text is done. And is text done as a specified font? Or we found going back in years of legacy data that sometimes fractions were not. And fractions may be individual entities. So they do not translate as a font. There are things that you can do to correct those. And then how we're going to do the data management. So once we do this discovery phase and we have all of this documented, now we can create a clear path for that. And that's, we actually develop that data migration and translation workflow and what's going to be undertaken. The development of the Autodesk-based environment. So how is that environment going to look at this end result? Not the file structure, but the actual environment. What custom routines do we have to do? What customization do we have to do for, say, AutoCAD line types to match a Bentley line type and things of that nature? So all of that has to be developed before the migration. And then the data management after the migration. How are they going to handle it? Is it a simple server that they'll host those files on, or will they be using a data management system such as ProjectWise or Vault? And so all of that is workflowed out and then in a flow chart so that we understand exactly the steps that are going to happen. After a migration and they're on the new platform, education is critical. So training it from the perspective of how do I do this? So from a MicroStation to a Autodesk AutoCAD environment, we have to make sure that they understand how to use and how to draw lines, arcs, and circles. How does that relate to AccuDraw? You know, put it in the terminology that some people may have used for years as part of that education plan, and make sure that they're completely trained within the software. If they're going from an open roads or a power civil, how do they do that in Civil 3D? For example, pipes in Power Civil were handled in a database. Now we're talking about parts list and catalogs in Civil 3D. So we want to make sure that that training and understanding for the software is there. And if they're moving into a new data management system, we also need to train them both as an end user and as an admin person on how to manage that data management system, such as Vault. So education is a critical point. And then beyond that, once the migration is done and everybody's trained, we have to support as post process of what we've done. And so there is project mentoring that's available, technical support, and our e-learning PRODUCTIVITYNOW platform. So in some cases, we may start out the discovery as a separate service. It depends on how large a project it is. And so we may do that as a separate service and then develop everything after that, or it may be included as a turnkey service all the way through the education part. So in the discovery, it's important that we make sure that the objectives are clear, that those goals are clear, so that we have an understanding of where we are beginning and where we want to end up. We need to document what needs to be migrated. Everything starts with a clean slate. And so we have to put down all those parameters from the Bentley environment and make sure that they equate to a parameter within the Autodesk environment. Automation needs to be defined. Again, what automation, such as design wizards, such as routines that were in the Bentley environment, we need to make sure that they're defined clearly and can be created in the Autodesk environment for use in the future. The data management environment, that process needs to be documented, what they're using now, what they will use in the future. And then the training and education needs to be defined. some cases where the organization needs are not clearly defined by the customer, then during our discovery process, and we will recommend a track and solutions for them to follow. And this may be a precursor to the actual implementation. The data migration and environment development. So we may have a custom environment that's based upon the Bentley legacy functionality. That may include the development of automation. The data management environment may be new, may be old, and so we need to make sure that that is. Of course, the migration of the legacy data, the DGNs to the DWGs, and then the development of that data migration and translation matrix. That's the critical issue. That's the result, the end result of all documentation. So the migration of legacy data and standards need to be developed, and then the automation and data management are developed after, and they vary per organization. Talked a little bit about education, AutoCAD training, customization to address those knowledge gaps between Bentley users and Autodesk users. And so we want to make sure that that's a clear understanding of how they did it before and how they're going to do it now. And from that, Civil 3D fundamentals, again, that difference between how it was designed in open roads, how it was designed in inroads, geopack, or just straight MicroStation, and how they're going to be doing it within a new Civil 3D environment. We find that there's less of a disconnect with the survey in there because it's driven by field codes, and those field codes can be recreated in the Autodesk environment for the field to finish functionality. So in general, we just have a processing of the data that needs to be looked at and trained on rather than an actual change in field procedures. Civil 3D Vault and BIM 360 data management systems, again, that's going to go into how they're going to do their data management in the future in the Autodesk world if they so choose to go that route. If it's just a direct server host, then it's going to stay the same. And then CAD management training. How are you going to maintain the template moving forward? Understanding what needs to be done, how the styles are created versus the seed files that were used in MicroStation. And so we want to make sure that there's a clear understanding from that level of management so that they can handle the ever evolving template that one uses for design for different disciplines. And then we also need to educate on the data conversion. What process did we use? How does the translation tables work? Because at the end, there are going to be some legacy files that pop up that they'll have to look at and they'll have to translate in the future. And so we want to make sure that they have a clear understanding on how that process works and how their end results are. Post-migration support is critical. Again, we want to make sure that we have the ability to reach out to our clients and support them as their partners after the migration. And so that may be over the shoulder mentoring and assistance with new projects. It may be in the form of our PRODUCTIVITYNOW and our e-learning and technical support. And then moving forward with the new software and the Autodesk platforms, there'll be training and assistance and mentoring in the higher disciplines and the other softwares such as hydrology, InfraWorks, Navisworks, Dynamo, and so forth. So we also provide assistance in that. So let's talk about migration speed bumps. And these are things that you really have to consider as you start to drill down. So some of the differences that we found in our process of the migration environment that you really need to focus on when you're doing a migration. The first one is level numbers. This seems simple, but as you go back into version 7 and before and some of the real legacy data, the level numbers do not directly transfer and migrate into an Autodesk layer. And so there are processes that need to be done to make sure that those very old legacy level numbers translate. The levels that are alpha characters translate directly on a one-to-one basis. Things to remember is that from a migration process, everything is one-to-one. So whatever was in that DGN, we're looking to transfer it over on a one-to-one basis to Autodesk or AutoCAD platform. Tags. We found historically that tags are not used as much as we would have used them, and so we really have to take a good look at that. If it's tagged, it can translate directly into an attribute, and we can utilize it in the AutoCAD world. But if they're just simple text and they've used other methods like attached Excel spreadsheets to manage their title blocks rather than have things tagged, then we want to make sure that we understand how that works and then change that into an attributed form moving forward. Borders are also one thing that we found problematic. So a lot of borders are just simply drawn in the model space and are entities as opposed to being an official border that is referenced to that particular drawing. If it's a border referenced, then it migrates directly as a reference with those attributes in there, those tags. And so those are the kind of things that we're looking for. Text. Again, as we all know, historically, text has been problematic in going from MicroStation to AutoCAD. And so we want to make sure that in that translation process that we are defining the Bentley environment text, and that text correlates directly into a text font, true font in the AutoCAD world. And so we want to make sure that that's one-to-one. We want to make sure that fractions are translated. And so in our QA/QC process that we do in any migration where we look at a percentage of the files, then we're going to make sure and really look at those fractions. If they were done as entities, we found that translation does not come through. So 3/4 is not 3/4, and so it may come through as 3 and a character F or something like that. And so that's caught in the QA/QC process, and there are methodology to correct those prior to the translation. So text is an issue. Line types. Line types are managed in two ways. The first is if the line type can be correlated directly to an AutoCAD line type, then that mapping is straightforward. If it is a custom line type, then that custom line type must be reproduced as an AutoCAD line type, and then it can be mapped directly to that new custom line type. So in most cases, try to translate directly from a standard Bentley line type over to a standard AutoCAD line type. This is a real issue, nested references. One of the nice features about MicroStation is that we can turn off the references and ignore them. That's fine until we start migrating those drawings forward. So nested references are problematic in the translation, but they're really problematic if we go into a data management system. And some of the common things that we see in those nested references are old server names, people that have referenced borders from local drives instead of from a server location and things of that. And so those things need to be cleaned up prior to the migration. And then again, we have the ability to do multiple models in MicroStation. Those multiple models will translate through into the AutoCAD environment, but they will translate through as individual models. And so if you have 3 models in a MicroStation drawing, then through the migration process, you will now have 3 AutoCAD drawings. So you have to be aware of those multiple models. And then ultimately, we want to take a look at the seed files and any CAD standards. And so again, we want to drill down on CAD standards. How were the designs done? How were they utilized from a drafting perspective as well as a design perspective? And to make sure that those CAD standards are well documented and are to be recreated or improved upon through the migration process. Some differences in the AutoCAD environment. The big one we found is paper space, model space. And so again, it's a one-to-one translation, and typically the paper space model space is corrected after the migration process. And so we go from DGN to DWG and then correct to the paper space model space. Again, I want to highlight text. Make sure that that text goes from a font to a font. And if it was done without a font, then we need to make sure that that's corrected. In the AutoCAD world, we want to make sure that we do true fonts and things like Arial and make sure that those are correlated in the translation matrix. AutoCAD line types. Are we using standardized AutoCAD line types, or will we be using customized AutoCAD line types? If we're customizing those line types, then time needs to be allotted for us to create those custom line types to match the custom Bentley line types. And then single models, keeping in mind again that everything is going to go into a single model in the AutoCAD world. So multiple models from the Bentley environment are going to become single models within the AutoCAD world. And then make sure that we document the new CAD standards as well as the creation of a new CAD template. From the migration process, we're going to come through. We need to create a CAD template that matches that so that any new drawings will be started on the new drawing format. And so that that CAD standard is allotted to move forward within our design process. So I want to take a look at the workflows, and I've broken this up into what we would do from the DGN perspective and what we would do from the DWG perspective. The first one is the documentation, levels, color, line weights. This is important as we migrate over to the AutoCAD, Autodesk platform, because we need to make that decision from the beginning. Are we going to plot by style in the AutoCAD world, where the line weights are embedded in the layers as they were embedded in the levels of the MicroStation environment, or are we going to be a color-based plotting system? And so we want to make sure that is correct. We want to make sure that there is a direct correlation between the MicroStation color and the AutoCAD color, or as close as we can get. There are tables out there that say this color in MicroStation is equivalent to this color in AutoCAD. And so we want to make sure that we do that transition in the matrix so that we know, again, everything is one-to-one. We want to make sure that that level of detail is there. And then the line weights. and put the line weights as close to possible from a MicroStation into that. Again, there are readily available tables in there that will tell you the standard MicroStation line weights are translated into this line weight into AutoCAD. So we want to make sure that's documented in the translation table. Again, line types, standard versus custom. We try to make as much transition from the standard MicroStation line type into a standard AutoCAD line type. So whatever's out of the box at AutoCAD, can we make it work with an appropriate LT scale? Can we take that center line? Does it match the center line in AutoCAD, or is it the center line too in AutoCAD? So we want to try to do standard to standard first, and then custom to custom if needed, knowing that any custom line types are going to increase the level of effort for the translation. Broken references. I can't tell you enough that this is something that has to be looked at in the migration process. We find old server names that no longer exist that MicroStation will carry, and that we find, again, if people reference things to local drives and then reference that in the drawings that were on the server or within the data management system, those have to be cleaned up to make sure that they translate, because what happens in the migration is as it pulls it through into the Autodesk platform, it's going to try and correct any of those reference files and change those into the Autodesk platform as it's pulling a particular drawing. So if we have a border directory, we're going to translate and migrate those first so that any subsequent DGN that references that border will pull that new translated border through. And so we need to make sure that those connections are documented. And that's a tough one. Sometimes it's, you have to go drawing to drawing that is, or DGN to DGN that's causing you problems, and look at those and look at all the paths and look at all the connections. And it may be a manual process where you have to edit those connections. It may be something that we can solve through an automation process. Again, single models versus multiple models. This is not really a difficulty, but you have to be cognizant of it in the sense that you now know that if you've got 3 models in a single sheet, it's going to be 3 sheets in the AutoCAD world. And so it'll take that translation straight through without a problem, but be cognizant of that. And then all of this data that we've collected ends up in a translation table, and this matrix controls those one-to-one items in that translation process. You know, the levels to layers, the cells to blocks, the lines to line types, and so forth. And so throughout this entire process, we're building this translation table. And so these are the steps that you have to go through for the DGN side of that translation table. The mirror effect on the Autodesk side, on the AutoCAD side, we have to go through and make sure that those colors and line weights, etc., are documented and then turned into that translation matrix. So as I said, there are tables available for line weights from MicroStation to AutoCAD, for colors from MicroStation to AutoCAD. Want to make sure that we follow those, and it may be that the color is not quite right, but maybe a little off within the AutoCAD palette, but there's always something that is deemed as an equivalent to that particular color in MicroStation. Again, line types, standard versus custom. We've talked about that. Multiple models and multiple single models within Autodesk. So one sheet may turn into 3, may turn into 6 sheets within the AutoCAD environment. The translation's still going to be one-to-one. It's going to carry the same name, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so it will automatically create those. So you may go from a folder that has X amount of files in it that now may have Y amount of files in that same folder within the AutoCAD environment. The paper space model space environment. This is an after translation. So after we translate one-to-one, if borders are entities within the drawing and in the DGN environment, then they're going to be entities within the drawing environment in the AutoCAD world. So the first thing that we would do is go through and replace those entities through an automation process with an actual border. And so that we have a physical border that can be attributed with title blocks and so forth. From there, then we can have, once we have borders, then we can, through an automation process, create a paper space model space environment where it moves the model space in correctly through the viewport. And then we now have the paper space model space environment. So that's done through an automated process. And so the transition of all this data is controlled through that translation table. Mirror images on the DGN side and the DWG side and what's happening. And then there's kind of the middle environment. This seed file equates to this template file. That the line types equate to this ACAD.lin file and things of that nature. And so this translation table controls that one-to-one migration. And again, I can't stress enough, if it's not in the DGN environment, it's not magically going to appear in the AutoCAD environment. So what does the successful migration look like? And so first I'm going to talk about an AutoCAD, MicroStation to AutoCAD translation and creation into the AutoCAD environment. For this particular client, we documented decades of CAD standards, or more clearly, decades of no CAD standards. And so as they had hundreds of people over the years working on projects, working on drafting, doing things like the wild, wild west and drawing as they saw fit with no CAD standards, you have to take into account for that. And you have to correct those kind of things prior to a translation. And so that documentation of those decades of CAD standards. So once we did that and we figured out a way to standardize those particular CAD standards, we had some automated routines that went through and took some very old legacy data and unified it and made it more standardized so that it would carry through in a migration process. Then we documented all the levels, colors, line weights, and et cetera, as we've talked about before. Then we created that translation table with a seed file. It needs a seed file to look at those parameters that we're using for the CAD standards from the MicroStation perspective. And so without that seed file, it's not going to translate all the text clearly and all the line types clearly and so forth. So we made a unified seed file that we were going to use in the translation process. Then we translated 170,000 active and legacy DGNs. So they had projects that were currently going on, as well as projects that, again, were decades old, that were simply references. Then we took 170,000 new AutoCAD drawings into the Autodesk Vault data management system. So they went from a server-based SharePoint system into a true data management system with their new DWGs and that work environment from that. So that's a MicroStation to AutoCAD transition. from a MicroStation, geopack, open roads, inroads to a civil 3D transition, it follows the same path. It all starts with the drafting standards. Then the extra step within that is, how are things being designed and what functionality is being used within that design software. First thing we do is we equate that to the design functionality within the new software environment of Civil 3D and how that's going to be handled. And then from there, once we've documented their CAD standards, and we find traditionally that from a design perspective, because of the way geopack and open roads and inroads works, that there are much more likely to have things standardized in what they're doing and the way things are being placed within the drawing, because the software controls some of that. And so it's less of an effort in the documentation end. We're not looking at decades generally from a design perspective. And so we take that documentation and we create that translation table, again with a seed file, and we move it over into the Civil 3D world from that. This is where education really becomes critical. From a drafting perspective, in a straight MicroStation translation into an AutoCAD environment, if you've drafted for a number of years, then it's terminology. And terminology is easy to, in your mind, make that adjustment and move over to another platform. So that goes fairly smoothly because it is just a drafting effort. When we go from the design effort, the terminology sometimes is very, very similar from a road design and how we're going to design those roads and how it's going to be created. And then in some cases, depending on which platform you're coming from the Bentley world, then the 3D dynamic modeling in Civil 3D may be a different concept. And so this is where education and project mentoring really become critical in that transition process. And so we've done a number of firms lately where we've gone from the Bentley platform into the Civil 3D world. And we start out with the basic lines, arcs, and circles in our training, then talk about how to do that within the AutoCAD world. And then we move into how to design in the Civil 3D world. And for the most part, it's pretty straightforward transition. Again, some of the things are more terminology. As I said, pipes are done in databases, and pipes are done in parts catalogs and parts list within the Civil 3D environment. And once that template is created in the Civil 3D environment, then it's straightforward and becomes picks and clicks. And so we don't have that much trouble from that transition period. It's all an education process into that. So it still correlates as the steps of define what you have, define where you're going, create a translation table. That matrix controls the one-to-one translation into the new environment. In the new environment, you may change over to paper space, model space. That can be done through an automated process. And then from there, it's the training on where you're going to go in the future. Are you going to be a drafter where it's just AutoCAD, say from a plant environment or a manufacturing environment? Or are you going to be a civil designer where you're going to utilize Civil 3D and its survey functionality? And so make sure that that training and mentoring is in process for that. That's the final step in the key to success. So that training of the client in whatever productive software you're going to do moving forward for production, whether it's AutoCAD, Civil 3D, and if we're moving into a vault system, a data management system, how is it customized for your particular needs? If you're moving over into a project-wise, then how are we going to load those DWGs into project-wise, and how will they be used? A couple of quick things about IMAGINiT services. Why are we good at this? Well, one, we're an Autodesk Platinum partner. Our infrastructure solution team members come from all segments of our industry. So we've got professional experience within the industry. We've got PEs and PSs on staff. And so that we have years of experience and we know where we need to go. We've got former Bentley employees for that. We've got over 100 years of experience in the Autodesk and Bentley world. We've done this for large organizations, as I said, 170,000 drawings that are DGNs that we translated. We've done this for civil firms that are going from a Bentley platform over into the Civil 3 environment on many, many occasions over the years. We've got a dedicated data management and implementation team. So these guys are the best of the best at what they do and how to manage data and how to customize data management systems. We also have a software development team. I talked about, routines that were created in the Bentley world. So if you have wizards that were used for design for design components of your planned production, and you have routines that were in the Bentley world, our software development team can recreate those and program routines that will work exactly the same within the Autodesk environment. We are also a certified Bentley developer too. We're kind of broken up into two components from IMAGINiT services, the consulting solutions, and then the performance support and training. The actual migration process that we've discussed here today would be under the consulting solutions umbrella, and that's where we will take and turnkey start to finish from MicroStation DGNs into the AutoCAD Autodesk platform world. And from that, we have PLM, PDM, data management. I've talked from the civil engineering perspective, but we also can do this from a building perspective on that. And then more importantly, in the learning process and the post support, we have a support of all of our Autodesk softwares. We can coach, we can mentoring, we've got client portal and content that we have. We've got live and online training from that perspective. Our support center is 17 experienced individuals. We're open 8 to 8 every day for questions, and depending on your support level is how your response will be. They are backed by our team of application engineers. So as things get escalated, they're escalated to 126 application engineers that have been in prior industry and are our solution consultants. We also work directly with Autodesk technical support. Support's on two bases. We have IMAGINiT eSupport and then priority support. Our eSupport is email only, next day service at 8-hour response time. Our priority support includes telephone calls, emails, screen sharing, and we try to turn that around within 2 hours as our target response, and it's usually less than that. So PRODUCTIVITYNOW is our 24-hour learning / mentoring portal, and it's a great post support for the migration because it allows you to have a searchable education system to help you continue with that content for moving into a new platform. It has knowledge and capture sharing, so there's customized content, there's standard procedures, there's my favorite, the workflows within PRODUCTIVITYNOW. You can click on an aspect. I want to create an alignment. It'll take you to that workflow. It'll show you the picks and clicks. And so especially as learning a new software and moving into a new platform, this PRODUCTIVITYNOW service really strengthens that process for that. And then in the end, it does increase productivity. So I thank you for your time today. If there's any questions, we'll try to field as many as we can with the remaining time. And if not, I will answer your questions through the email. Gladys?
Thanks, Kevin. Let's start the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please go ahead and key them into the questions panel. And I'm seeing one question. Why migrate the entire company data from MicroStation platform to Autodesk? Isn't it cheaper to keep both platforms until old projects are completed and start new projects with the Autodesk platform? The migration should only be limited standards and templates.
So that's a great question. So from a civil engineering perspective, then that's typically the way it would happen. And so you would just look at what am I doing now, what's active, and leave your legacy data as is. But generally, the migration is taking place because you want to get rid of a platform. And so our civil clients are leaving the Bentley platform and moving over to a Civil 3D platform. So you're right in that we're just going to migrate what's necessary for them to move forward, and then typically they will finish projects that they have in their Bentley platform. But once that cutoff point happens, typically they get rid of Bentley. In the case that I showed with the 170,000, it's because their legacy data was used as references in their active projects. And so rather than go through and figure out where that cutoff point was from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was more cost effective to migrate that over so that it could actively be pulled into the new DWGs. Reason being for them is they are moving off of the Bentley platform in its entirety, and they have a deadline ahead that once that date comes, they will no longer have access to the Bentley platform. I hope that answers your question.